You ever thought what was the most or the greatest or perhaps the biggest thing you could ever achieve? If you could pick one thing that you would like to be cemented as the biggest and topmost, if you will, idea or entity that you could possibly have, what do you suppose it would be? Some people will tell you it's the size of the bank account, right? They desire for financial security. Some people may desire for something like a lasting memory, if you will, a legacy that they can pass on. I've bumped into a number of both. Individuals who keep acquiring wealth simply for the purpose of acquiring wealth, no other reason. And I've known others that go into the business of, trying to leave, if you will, a legacy for themselves. You see this all the time, right? In benches and parks and everything else where they say, in memory of such and such. Or when they donate to a cause, they put their name on a brick and pay extra money to, and you can forever see that name. There's nothing wrong with these ideas necessarily, as long as they're done in the right manner. But do you really think those are the utmost, the biggest, the best that we could possibly do? And it's interesting because St. Augustine had a statement to say. And he said, the greatest good one can accomplish is wisdom. The greatest good is wisdom. And that is a very, very profound statement for me as I think about that. Because, you think of the story of Solomon in the Bible, right? Where he has been crowned king of Israel and he has no idea how to go forward. So what does he do? He offers a lot of sacrifices to God. And the Lord appears to him and says, what is your heart's desire? And Solomon asks for wisdom to rule his people. And God granted that. Earlier, as we looked in the book of James, we see where James said, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask of God and he will give it to you. Wisdom is a thing that we should be seeing and should be acting for and should be eagerly desirous of, obviously from biblical examples. But you know that there's more than one type of wisdom. There's the good wisdom and the bad wisdom. The good wisdom, the bad wisdom. Now, how do we determine what is wise and what is understanding and all that? Well, James answers that. Today we can look in chapter 3, verse 13. We'll read the rest of the chapter, 13 through 18. And what we're going to find is this basic principle, that God desires us to have a wisdom, not of this world, but of God. So if you will, you can turn with me to verse 13 of chapter 3, and we'll read. It says, who among you is wise and understanding? By his good conduct he should show that his works are done in gentleness that comes from wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For when there is envy and selfish ambition, there is disorder in every evil practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without pretense. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. 3 points I think we can make here as we examine this idea of wisdom that comes from God. And the first one is, just simple as what we see in verse 13, is that the greatest aspect or view into our lives as to a person is wise or not is seen by their actions. Wisdom is seen in your actions. That person with good conduct is generally thought to be wise. All right, if you were to look at somebody and you would see them jumping off the house roof, the first thought that usually comes to a person's mind is not, that is the most wisest thing I have ever seen a person do. Right? A person who jumps off the roof, you usually don't say, that is wise. It may be fun, it may be funny, it might be entertaining, but it's probably not wise, right? Where does that wisdom come from? Well, it could come from two different things. And that's what we look at here. Our actions come from either our experience or the lessons we've learned. Experience dictates to us that jumping off the roof ends up with a broken ankle, right? So we don't do it anymore. So when people don't see you jumping off the roof, there's no reason for them to question your wisdom, your maturity, your ability to do things, right? Pretty simple. In my life, there's a lot of lessons I've had to learn the hard way. There's a lot of lessons I've done, even as a little kid, silly things, right? Like, don't touch an electric fence with both hands and hang on. It's not a really good idea. Don't ride your bike directly into a tree at full speed. That's not a good idea either. There's all kinds of things you learn, and you learn the hard way. Now, there's also the other type we get. We get wisdom from lessons. Wisdom of things we've learned. Think of this as book knowledge, or an instructor, or a teacher, perhaps. Someone that has told you, don't jump off that roof. And you've listened to them, because you understand the concept as they explain it to you. So your good conduct is generally thought to be wise when you behave a certain way based on your experience, and you've learned from it, or from the lessons that you have learned. But it's very fascinating that how we act based on what we learn shows how wise we are. You realize that if you keep jumping off the roof despite breaking your ankles, it shows the exact opposite of wisdom. It shows you cannot learn, even from experience. So how we act based on what we learn shows where wisdom comes from. Wisdom is basically applying knowledge in the right manner. We understand that jumping off the roof is bad for our health, therefore we don't do it. That's where wisdom comes from. But take a look, it's not just about good conduct or doing it, but it says that we'd be done in gentleness. Other translations will use the word meekness or humility. And the idea behind this is not something weak, okay? I want you to picture a big horse, Pick your horse, it doesn't really matter. All horses are pretty much the same like this, okay? They're bigger than me, and they got a mean kick, and they got a mean bite. My shoulder remembers the bite. You grab a horse's ear and you twist it. A horse is not going to appreciate it. It does not matter the breed of horse. It does not matter the situation of the horse. The horse will not like it. And a horse would be completely justified in at least doing nothing else than rearing its head, throwing you off, nudging you, biting you, or stomping on you, right? Because you're twisting its ears. Meekness is a picture of a giant horse and a little girl. And the little girl loves horses. She walks right up to it and goes, "Horsey!" Grabs the ears and just rings them like crazy. And the horse, though fully capable of defending itself, though fully right in doing so, and fully capable of inflicting all kinds of damage on that little girl, does nothing. It is the idea of extreme power under control. That is what he says here. Extreme power under control. It is power in strength has been placed in check because of this wisdom. So as we go out there and do things that show our wisdom, it is on the basis of our ability to respond to situations that are wrong against us with this attitude that says, I have the right, I have the ability, I have the justification to do this, but I choose not to. And why? Because that comes from wisdom. Somewhere along the line, you've learned lashing out, defending yourself, paints a very negative picture. That horse knows that little girl, if he steps on her, it could be dramatic effect to him, right? So even though it's not pleasant, even though it is not right, the horse is capable of withstanding that kind of annoyance and that kind of a problem and continue his life. A person with gentleness and acts in this way is generally thought to be wise. I've heard stories of business executives. This is probably the one coming from my father. In being in rooms with these guys, and they're going at each other like nothing else. Personal, vicious, venomous attacks. Because it's all political up there, right? And then someone just doesn't say anything at all. Just lets everyone air their grievances, and then that is it. Walks out of there. And generally speaking, the person that went up in everyone's estimation, the individual who increased, if you will, their influence over the crowd, is the one who did not respond. Why? Because it shows a level of wisdom. They recognize it's not the time, it's not the place, it's not going to do any good. Wisdom. When we have a gentleness and our conduct matches that, we are assumed to be wise and understanding. But, now comes the but. There is a wrong kind of wisdom. It is a wisdom not from God. It says right here in 14, it says, but if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For there is envy and selfish ambition. There is disorder in every evil practice. There is 4 signs of the wrong kind of wisdom, I find, in this passage. First one he talks about is bitter envy. We really don't need to go into that. I think everyone understands what envy is. It's that green little monster that sits on your and says, that should be mine. I want that. I need that. You know, I think of Gollum in the Lord of the Rings movie theaters, right? Yeah, that's the kind of thing envy is. It jumps into us. But what's very fascinating, it's the same word to describe the bad water in 3:11. Where it talks about blessing and cursing coming out of a mouth. It says, does a spring pour out sweet and bitter water from the same opening? Here he is, he's drawn back to that same idea, the contrast between good and evil. Here he said, this is bitter, this is evil, this is bad stuff, right? When you have that envy, when you have it, and it's in stark contrast to all that is good, this is what is all that is bad. Envy, right? And then he uses the word selfish ambition. The actual Greek translates to something like work for hire. In other words, it is spoken of a sense of those who are only seeking their own. I'm not going to do anything unless you give me a paycheck. All right? To a degree, I think a lot of us are this way. You know, I don't volunteer my time down at my job for the fun of it. Okay? I got bills to pay. I got things I want to do. I got goals in mind. That job is a means to an end. I understand that. But when you do this in the expression of our sinful nature, which is preoccupied with the idea of wanting our own way to do our own thing with our own thing. So, in other words, you're not willing to give up anything because of what you want based on what you can bring, right? Selfish ambition basically means you're building yourself up for the means of your own self. That's all it is. When there is envy and selfish ambition, see what it says. It says, if you have that, don't boast and deny the truth. Right there we talk about bragging. Right? Basically that's what it means. It means to boast or rejoice against. It's not just like, yay, I won. No, it's like, yay, I won and you lost. That's what we're talking about there. When you have those things, that's the kind of attitude you have. You want to pretend like you have wisdom, but you got that selfish ambition and you got that envy and you're bragging about it. And finally, what it basically says, if you do all of those, you are lying. Take a look at what it says there. It says, don't boast and deny the truth. If you say you have wisdom, but you've got that envy, you've got that selfish ambition, and you got all these issues, you're lying to yourself. That's ultimately what it boils down to. It's not anything more than that, but it's sad to say that a lot of people deceive themselves. They literally think they have all the stuff they need. They literally think they have all the answers. They literally think they and them. It's all about them. And so when you do that and you run with that, you can see the reality that happens. If you say you are wise, but you live in a way that you are not, you are living a lie. You are lying to yourself. And you know what? I can guarantee you, you're not lying to anybody else. Almost everyone can see through you. If you've got problems and you're bringing them in and you're trying to tell people you know things, James says don't say that, okay? If you've got issues in your own life, don't go around trying to tell people how to live their lives. They're going to see right through your advice and realize you have problems. Right? It's wisdom that we can understand. There is that bad wisdom. Where does this quote-unquote wisdom come from? Where did we get this idea that we have the ability to promote ourselves and this ability that I want and I'm going to gain, and that we end up lying to ourselves? Where does this so-called wisdom come from? Well, he gives a very strange statement here in verse 15. Because he says, such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. You got to see it's a descending case here. There's examples, and it's bad to worse to way worse, right? The first part he talks about, it's earthly. It means it's man-made. No other deal than that. It's made up by man. This wisdom is not coming from any kind of source. This is literally something we've made up for our own purpose. Secondly, it's unspiritual, which means there's no moral gain to it, right? Not only is it something we've made up, this wisdom that we claim is wisdom, it means also that there's no moral gain to it. You know, we have this idea of right versus wrong in almost every situation that we put ourselves into. You know, what is the best thing for me to do at this point? How do I handle this situation? Where do I go? We have that question. But with this wisdom that we're talking about, this bad wisdom, not only is it made up by man, but we have no moral compass to ask that question. You just automatically do the wrong thing. Why? Because, again, your envy and your selfish ambition, and you're denying yourself. And finally, he says, it's demonic. There's where the root of the origin becomes. I don't necessarily know if he means that everything in the world comes from or stems from this idea of a demon or Satan influencing you. I don't know if that's what he talks about here. But I think the illustration is that the thoughts and plans can be placed on equal par with that of demonic activity. Temptations arrive in your life because they can sidetrack you from the truth so easily. If you are out for financial gain and you're walking down the walk of life lying to everyone about how smart and good you are, and you're realizing your bank account's almost near zero, and suddenly you see this great deal in front of you that you can make a lot of money, never mind it's a Ponzi scheme, and you jump on it without even giving thought to anything else. There's no moral weighing. There's no wisdom into it. You're going to get caught eventually, I can almost guarantee you. But all you see is a chance to make money. You jump on it. The devil knows our weaknesses. He knows where we are. We can't hide that from him. All right? He's not an idiot. He knows the weakest link in our chain. And he is going to exploit that. So if we have a problem, guarantee you the devil will take advantage of that. And if we know we've got problems, don't deny it. Don't be in that denial. Don't put yourself further in the hole by pretending to be something we are not. Right? We're not super spiritual. There is an intended downward progression of these three adjectives. We said before, this is something we need to remember. It's intentional. Earthly is, again, it's not from heaven, but it's man-made. We talk unspiritual means it's not fruit of the Holy Spirit, but it is something that we make up for our own purpose, our own, no moral gain. Demonic means that it stoops to actions that resemble the behavior of demons rather than that of men. When we follow these kinds of evil, this is where it goes. Such wisdom leads to disorder and evil. It's very interesting what he says right there in verse 16. But where there is envy and selfish ambition, there is disorder in every evil practice. Can you imagine a church where everyone thinks they're wise, smart, and knows everything? You know what happens? Church is split. I've been part of one. I've seen it happen. And you know what the issue was? The paint color in the women's bathroom. It wasn't even spiritual. It wasn't anything important. It wasn't like it's somebody's house. It's a minor issue, a minor detail, yet because a couple of people thought they were bigger than themselves and greater than themselves, they couldn't get along, and the parties separated, and there was a split. That church never recovered, and eventually it closed its doors. When people think they're smart, discord happens, right? We see the godly wisdom will bring the peace. We'll see that in the following chapter or verses here. But one of the things we say is that there is wisdom from below will result in discord. Now take a look at the second thing it says right there, is that it says in every evil. It's very interesting. Every evil practice. He didn't go through the list and say what it's going to look like. All right? That's one thing we need to understand. We don't have, from James' perspective, he couldn't think of all the things that could possibly go wrong. Just a generalization that says it opens the door for everything. Right? Once the floodgates open up and we say we are smart and we have that pride and the selfish ambition involved in our lives and in our church, we open the door to all kinds of problems. And there is the problem that we have. Every evil thing basically means righteousness will be absent in our lives. So what is the good wisdom as opposed to the bad wisdom that leads to envy and lack of righteousness? But take a look in 17. He says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, and then it's peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy, good fruits, unwavering, without pretense. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who've cultivated peace. This is the idea we have with godly wisdom. It is talks about pure, idea meaning innocent or perfect. Comes from the same root word, believe it or not, as holy. Peace-loving talks about quietness or rest, desirous of that. It's not a thing of anything else, but it's the opposite of chaos. It's the opposite here where he just painted a picture of disorder. Now he's saying, no, it actually is full of order. We start with the holy, which is kind of like the opposite of evil. And then we go to, from disorder, we go to peace-loving or quietness or rest. And then it goes beyond and it talks about gentleness, being able to be patient and considerate, compliant. I think that's a bad translation, personally, myself. I think some of the better ones, you can look at different translations, and there's a couple ones that will say, open to reason, easily persuaded, or ready to be convinced. It's an idea that speaks that you're willing to talk to someone about an issue rather than drawing up hard and fast borders and saying, this is the issue and we're not going to resolve until I get it my way. No, it's rather the idea that says we can actually come together and think about a solution together in between, being willing to go that far, right? Godly wisdom allows you to do that. It's also full of mercy. The idea of unmerited favor, something other people don't deserve, you're willing to extend to them simply because you are wise and you are full of God's wisdom. It talks about good fruits that we see right there. You remember that what Jesus said in John 15, he said that it was only when we abide in him will we be able to bear any fruit. The reality is, apart from God, this is impossible for us to accomplish. Now, the word it says right there, it says unwavering. This is very one. This is the only time it appears in the New Testament. And it speaks to a person who is undivided in his commitment and conviction and does not make unfair distinctions. All right? We're talking about someone who knows what's right and he sticks with it even when it hurts. You do the right thing even when it hurts. That's what godly wisdom will show you. And without pretense. Literally, that means without hypocrisy. Okay? You're not an actor. You're not pretending. You are literally living your life the way God wants, and what you see is the real deal. When you have all of these things and godly wisdom in your life and you put it into practice, as we saw in verse 13, one by his good conduct and his gentleness that comes from wisdom, when he has all these things, the fruit of this is peace. You will have peace with people. It's just very fascinating. When you operate with the world's wisdom, the wisdom not of God, you end up with disorder and evil. But when you operate with God's wisdom, the general result is peace. Now, I'm not perfect at this. I can't claim that I resolve my conflicts according to God's wisdom. I don't even know if I'm at 50% of the time. Truth be told, there's always something that's irritating me somewhere. I have a lot to work on this. I was talking with a buddy down at work about this past week, and I said I preach more of this sermon to myself than I do to anyone else. Simply because the reality is I know things get in my way. My own emotions, my own frustrations. And I bring the baggage with me in every decision I make. Right? Situations happen at work, add stress to the home life, which adds stress to church life, which adds stress to work life, which adds stress to home life, which adds stress to work life, right? And it just goes on and on and on and on. When I operate by the world's actions, the world's definition of peace, or wisdom, I should say, I do not have peace. I have disorder. And when I get disorder, I get frustrated, I get angry, I say things, I do things that I shouldn't. Maybe you can relate. Maybe this morning, this message is meant for both of us, you and me. Maybe the question we should ask ourselves is, when God or when somebody looks at you and me, what do they see? Do they see godly wisdom? It's a question that makes me ponder. Makes me go, I need to improve my life. I hope I can say, as I go down the life, go down through this world, that I am indeed striving towards that godly wisdom in all my actions. I hope that I can say that. It doesn't excuse me when I don't. It's something we have to work on all the time. Because I don't understand this. Godly wisdom brings peace in my life. Godly wisdom brings that peace in my life. If my words and my deeds are inspired by the wisdom from above, I will reap that wonderful fruit of peace. If that is something we desire in your life this morning, I would invite you to take a few moments to think about, where are you operating from? When you make your decisions, what is the motivation and what is your wisdom? Is it the worldly wisdom or is it godly wisdom? There is our challenge, and there is our question. Let's close with a word of prayer.